Beneath the dead city on the planet Veyra, time seemed to have been drained away by the never-ending acid rains. Collapsed buildings stood desolate like gigantic skeletons, covered in layers of ash and corroded metal. Every step through the rubble echoed with hollow sounds, reverberating the size of history, war, betrayal, slaughter, and loneliness. Here, in the deepest shadows of a once glorious world, a cross-species story began, born from the depths of suffering. Arkin moved quietly through the third basement of the abandoned sector. This human man had once been the pride of the resistance forces, but now he was only a faint shadow in the eyes of those who survived. Survival, that was all he did each day, like an emotionless habit. A long scar marred his back, and his left leg limped from an old piece of shrapnel that had never been removed. Beneath his faded coat and rusted plasma gun, all that remained was a heart still yearning for meaning, even if he himself no longer knew what he was searching for. The damp, cold air of the basement wrapped every movement in a shroud of deathly mist. Arkin couldn't remember the last time he'd spoken to anyone truly alive. Sometimes he mumbled to himself, or to Pin, the old medical robot that could only perform the simplest commands. But that morning, while searching for parts and food, Arkin heard a strange sound echoing through the cracked concrete, a hoarse, faint moan, heavy with pain and despair. His survival instincts made him freeze, hand tightening on his gun. The moan was unlike the sound of a hunting beast, and not like the scavenger thieves who roamed at night. He walked slowly, eyes wary of every dark corner. When he pushed aside a broken sheet of steel blocking the way, the sight before him made him stand motionless. Beneath the gray dust was a female body, blue-gray skin standing out in the dim light. The alien armor was battered, and purplish-black blood soaked her hip and belly. Her golden eyes, sharp and cold but unable to hide the pain, stared straight at him. She was a female Revalis, a species that had once spread terror across Earth, famous for cruelty and icy pride. But now she was merely a creature abandoned, no longer able to fight, with no comrades left, nothing but the raw instinct to survive. Arkin held his defensive stance, gun trained on her, eyes never leaving her slightest move. The woman closed her eyes slightly, saying nothing, neither begging for rescue nor for a quick end. That cold composure made Arkin's chest sink. A familiar feeling from years on the battlefield came flooding back, the helplessness in the face of a fading life no one cared for. He lowered his gun and stepped closer. "If you're still alive after 7 hours down here, you're either blessed by luck or too stubborn a monster to die," Arkin said, his voice low and as dry as the air around him. The Revalis woman struggled to speak, managing only a bitter reply. "You're the last person I need mercy from." Arkin smirked. "I have no mercy left to give. I just want to salvage a bit of conscience that was thrown away with my comrades' corpses." He said nothing more, slowly clearing each piece of metal from her body. Her wounds were deep, her spine showing under taut skin, her breath shallow and broken, but her eyes remained defiant, never leaving him for an instant. He wrapped her wounds temporarily to stop the bleeding, then hoisted her onto his shoulder. Her body was almost motionless from the waist down, the armor on her back shattered, blood pouring out relentlessly. "If you want to die, go ahead. But if you want to live, keep your mouth shut and don't make me change my mind," he said, walking through the flickering light of Pin, quietly leading the way to the deepest shelter he had. Arkin's shelter was a collection of old technology scraps, dismantled weapons, half-functional medical equipment, and countless memories he tried to bury. Pin, the small robot only waist-high, clattered along, scanning Lyra's vital signs as Arkin laid her on the operating table. Species identified, Revalis female. Status, Multiple trauma, acute blood loss, spinal injury, Pin repeated monotonously. Arkin switched on the sterilizer, washing her wounds with practiced movements, those of a man who had saved more lives and corpses than he could count. When he removed her abdominal armor, Lyra bit her lip until it bled but made no sound. Cold sweat beaded on her brow, her eyes showing both pain and pride. "What's your name?" he asked, not taking his eyes off the wound he was stitching. She hesitated, then replied in a weak but clear whisper, "Lyra." Arkin nodded. "Lyra, then I have bad news for you. Your lower body is temporarily paralyzed. Your spine is shattered in 3 places, and you're at high risk of septicemia. Don't expect to stand up anytime soon." Lyra looked him in the eye and sneered. Someone who's already been pushed off the front line by her own kind isn't afraid of anything except the boredom of living. He injected her with biogel, gently massaging her hip, feeling the muscle twitch beneath his calloused hand. Despite his age and scars, Arkin's hands were gentle as they touched her vulnerable flesh. His warmth seeped into Lyra's cold skin, drawing from her an involuntary whimper, not of pain, but of helplessness and shame at being so exposed before a stranger, one whose species had once been her enemy. When her wounds had been temporarily treated, Arkin carefully carried her to the small bed in the corner of the shelter. Lyra closed her eyes, her breathing heavy. He sat beside her, pulled a blanket up over half her body, and quietly stepped out, leaving Lyra to rest. The first night passed, a magnetic storm sweeping through the city. The whole shelter shook at intervals. The temperature dropped fast, leaving only the distant howling wind and the sound of acid rain drumming on the metal roof. Arkin sat with his back to the wall, eyes drifting toward Lyra. Sometimes he felt she was his own reflection, a warrior stripped of everything, left only with a wounded body and a soul waiting to be healed. In fitful sleep, he heard Lyra's faint moans, her lost cries for her mother echoing from a mess of memories. The next morning, when Arkin woke, Lyra was still immobile. But her eyes were no longer cold. They softened into a quiet sadness, tinged with unspoken gratitude. "Why did you save me?" she asked softly. Arkin looked deep into her eyes. "Because there's no one left to do it. And because I once wished someone would save me, but no one ever did." Lyra was silent, her lips trembling. "I was once a commander. I thought I was invincible. Now all I have left is a ruined body and a faith turned to rot." Arkin placed his hand on her shoulder, warm and steady, transferring a strange strength to her. "If you're still alive, if you can still feel cold, pain, the touch of another, then there's still a reason to keep going." In the cramped shelter, that closeness began to grow like a smoldering flame, spreading through every corner of their souls. In the days that followed, Arkin and Lyra struggled together against pain, paralysis, and relentless hunger. Arkin experimented with odd meals using whatever was left, sometimes just thin porridge mixed with recycled protein. At first, Lyra refused to eat, but hunger, along with the gentle tone of Arkin's voice, eventually made her accept. One night, when the magnetic storm peaked and the temperature plunged to dangerous levels, the heating system failed completely. Arkin hurriedly took the last blankets and crawled beside Lyra, wrapping both of them tightly together. They shared body heat, the smell of sweat, the hurried beating of hearts, and all the unspoken fears. "I never thought I'd find peace lying next to a human man," Lyra whispered, her lips grazing Arkin's ear. Arkin smiled, arms sliding around her waist, feeling every curve and breath of Lyra's body. "Maybe because we've both been too close to death, we finally know how to treasure these moments," he replied softly. Lyra's hand trembled, not only from the cold but from emotions pent up inside. She pressed herself closer, her blue skin brushing against Arkin's bare chest, her lips gliding over his collarbone. Their eyes met, a silence stretching until it nearly suffocated them. "If you want to," Lyra murmured, "I have nothing left to lose." Arkin placed a gentle kiss on her forehead, tender yet trembling. "I don't want to take advantage of your weakness, but I also don't want to miss the one thing left in this world that can make me feel alive." Lyra smiled, for the first time losing that cold edge. She pulled Arkin's hand down to her hip, letting his fingers touch skin hot with emotion. In the darkness, inside the cold shelter, two broken souls found each other, not just to survive but to truly live. Their breaths intertwined, bodies pressed close, the burning desire of both threatening to burn down every wall of pain. They didn't rush, nor were they rough, just soft touches, sweet kisses full of desperation. Lyra's body slowly heated beneath Arkin's hand, each scar and numb place awoken, as if with his warmth she might stand and walk again, if only in a dream. That night, in a world that had fallen, they belonged to each other. No more species, no more war, just two people needing each other to exist, to not vanish into the cold storm outside. The next morning, the magnetic storm had just eased, but the chills still crept into every corner of the shelter. Arkin woke up to find Lyra already awake, her sharp golden eyes watching him for a long while from across the blanket, as if she was trying to hold on to every precious second of peace after so much loss. The pale light from the safety lamp cast an odd glow on Lyra's blue-gray skin, making her seem at once alien and strangely fragile. Arkin stretched, pulling the blanket back over Lyra's shoulders, his hand unconsciously sliding along her side, pausing at the slender waist where, just last night, the two of them had clung to each other against the cold darkness. That sensation lingered, deep and potent, making him momentarily forget her motionless legs lying still beneath the covers. Lyra blinked, exhaling softly. "I thought your kind only knew how to compete and destroy. Who knew humans could be so good at keeping even their enemies warm," she whispered, her voice still hoarse from pain, but already softer after all they had shared. Arkin chuckled lightly, using a finger to sweep Lyra's silver hair from her brow. "If I didn't, I'd freeze to death too. Down here, it doesn't matter anymore who's friend and who's foe." Then he stood and quietly moved over to Pin, the medical robot, still scanning life signs on its ancient screen. "Master, abnormal movement detected in the main corridor," Pin suddenly announced, its mechanical voice flat. Arkin immediately grabbed his gun, his eyes sharpening into complete alertness. Lyra propped herself up on her elbows, her body trembling from cold and pain, but her eyes blazed with a warrior's fire, the survival instinct that had never left her. Arkin signaled for Lyra to keep quiet, then pressed his ear to the steel door. Noises drifted in from afar, heavy footsteps, metal scraping on the ground, and a muffled conversation in a language not of humans. Scavengers. Or perhaps a squad of mercenaries hired to clear out the trash left behind after the battle. Whatever they were no longer safe. Arkin quietly locked every security door, handing Lyra a compact sidearm. "Maybe you can't run, but you can still fight, right?" he asked, his eyes tinged with a challenge. Lyra gripped the weapon, her fingers trembling with a mix of fear and pain. "Don't expect me to let you die alone," she whispered back. In that moment, in the tension between being discovered and enduring pain, something strange and profound surged up between them. They were no longer two opposing beings, but two souls sharing the same fate, standing together against the rest of the world. The sounds outside grew closer and closer. 3 figures appeared on the security camera, a huge man in an iron mask, 2 others lugging breach equipment. Though injured, Lyra kept her breathing steady, her eyes sweeping the whole space, identifying every possible point of defense. Arkin placed a hand on her shoulder, a light squeeze that held both comfort and the resolve not to give up. A crack of electricity rang out, the side door blasted open. Arkin fired, a red plasma bolt searing the jacket of the first intruder. The second man fell back, firing wildly, but Lyra, even unable to stand, aimed and squeezed off a shot that struck his shoulder. The air filled with the smell of smoke, burning metal, and the tight space choked with chemical fumes. Pin howled, alarms blaring, its screen flashing survival data for both masters. The firefight lasted less than 2 minutes but left the whole bunker hazy, thick with the smell of blood and chemicals. 2 attackers lay dead near the door. The last one, panic-stricken, ran for his life, abandoning his friends and gear in the corridor. Arkin, breathing hard, looked over at Lyra. Blood flecked her cheek, her eyes shining proud after surviving the fight. "Still not dead," she laughed, her voice tinged with both the thrill of victory and a faint relief. "Not dead, but we're nowhere near safe," Arkin replied, squeezing her slender shoulder. "We'd better prepare for the worst." He quickly dragged the corpses out, searching them for medical supplies and whatever rations remained. Lyra, still lying on the bed, checked her weapon with trembling hands, but her resolve was unwavering. Suddenly, a sharp pain shot through her spine and she gasped, curling up as electric agony raced down her wounded back. Arkin dropped everything, rushing to Lyra's side, cradling her in his arms. "Breathe. Ignore the pain. Look at me." His voice was low and gentle, like a strange melody in this cold, hellish place. Lyra forced herself to obey, eyes locked onto his, her hands gripping his jacket tightly. "Don't let go," she whispered, breath coming fast, eyes brimming with tears that wouldn't fall. He bowed his head, pressing his forehead to hers, and for a moment they both closed their eyes, motionless in the eye of the storm. When the pain finally eased, Lyra relaxed, nestling her cheek against Arkin's chest, listening to his heartbeat, strong, rapid, yet as steady as the only anchor she had left in this world. The danger wasn't over the next day. Arkin knew the intruders would be back, maybe more of them, maybe worse. They had to move. Lyra couldn't travel far on her own, so he built a crude exoskeleton, using straps and scavenged motors, just enough to pull her on a makeshift sled. Before they left, Lyra insisted, "Don't let me be dead weight. If you can't take me, leave me here." But Arkin shook his head, eyes hard as forged steel. "If you're alive, there's still a chance. No one gets left behind." That made Lyra bite her lip, determined not to let him see her cry. Together, they crossed dusty corridors, past whining machinery in the dark, broken glass and rusted robot husks. Every meter was a challenge. The air thinned, Arkin had to both pull Lyra, keep his gun ready and soothe her through waves of pain. Sometimes he had to stop, wipe sweat from his brow and slump down right beside her, breath ragged. "You really could just leave me," Lyra murmured, her voice worn thin. Arkin didn't answer, just leaned over to wipe her brow, and then suddenly pressed his lips to her hair, a kiss that wasn't lust but a silent vow. "You've saved plenty of lives, but maybe never let anyone really save you. Let me do it this time," he whispered. That intimacy, even amid danger, sparked something new in Lyra, a feeling both fragile and powerful. She lifted her face, eyes brimming with a yearning to live, to be touched, to belong to someone, if only for a brief moment. They found another abandoned shelter, deeper, cramped, but safe for now. Arkin set Lyra down on the old bed, quietly checked all the alarms and returned to her side. Lyra trembled, partly from cold, mostly from exhaustion after the long move. "Take your shirt off," she suddenly ordered, her voice weak but still holding the old authority of a commander. Arkin hesitated, then laughed. "Don't tell me you're thinking." Lyra shook her head, lips curving into a challenging smile. "You humans always think it's about that. I just want your warmth, not your body." But as Arkin really did take off his shirt and lay down next to her under the thin blanket, both realized how thin the line was between keeping warm and desire. Their bodies pressed together, skin meeting again, breaths mingling. This time, Lyra herself slid her hand along Arkin's side, down to his waist, pulling him closer. Her eyes burned wild and aching. "If I don't make it through the night, at least let me remember what it's like to want." Arkin didn't say another word, just buried his face in Lyra's neck, inhaling her alien skin and sweat. They were no longer hesitant. His fingers explored her, every touch making Lyra shiver, not only from pain but from the hunger to feel alive. No longer a commander and a survivor, they were two beings clutching at life, at each other, if only for a night when tomorrow wasn't guaranteed. Lyra arched toward him, pulling Arkin close, their lips finding each other amid ragged breaths and the hammering acid rain. Their imperfect bodies scarred, aging came together like fragile flames in a frozen hell. When Arkin's skin brushed the scar along Lyra's hip, he paused, glancing up as if to ask, "Are you okay?" Lyra tightened her arms around his neck, lips brushing his ear, whispering, "Never better than this." They belonged to each other in the dark, under the pale flicker of the security monitor. All fear, pain, and regret fell away, leaving only touch, embrace, burning kisses, and the new conviction that, even hunted, even facing the unknown tonight, they were truly alive together for each other. Afterward, lying still, skin still warm, Lyra rested her head on Arkin's chest, tracing small circles around an old scar. "Do you regret it?" she asked. Arkin squeezed her gently, his voice hoarse with emotion. "If I did, I'd never have dragged you through so much hell." Lyra closed her eyes, sighing, a first, allowing herself to dream of something beyond survival. Scene shifts to the next morning. The alarm sounded again. The hunters had returned, this time more numerous and better armed. Arkin jumped up, threw on his shirt, checked his weapons, eyes meeting Lyra's with unwavering determination. "Once more, we can't run forever," he said. Lyra smiled, drawing her gun, her eyes blazing. "Let them try. Tonight, I'm no longer the one left behind." The sound of alarms echoed throughout the bunker. The flashing red lights threw a strange mix of pride and fragility onto Lyra's pale face. Outside, the pounding of boots, the clang of metal, and the electric roar signaled that the predators had completely surrounded the area. Arkin buttoned up his shirt, quickly threw on a light suit of armor, his gun clenched tightly in hand. Lyra lifted her weapon, her body still half lying, half sitting on the sled, her sharp gaze betraying a flicker of nervousness she couldn't hide. Even after a night of raw closeness, the warrior in her had not faded. "Stay right here. If they break through, I'll drag you into the rear escape tunnel," Arkin said softly, his eyes glued to the sensor display. Lyra smirked. "Do you really think I'll just sit here and wait to die?" Arkin glanced at her, his eyes revealing both helplessness and determination. "I'm too old to be a hero, Lyra, but if I can save you one more time, I won't hesitate." She fell silent, her heart pounding at his words. The fear of abandonment, deeply rooted since the day her own comrades betrayed her, surged violently. But next to Arkin, she would not allow herself to be weak again. The predators battered the door outside. A massive explosion ripped the silence. The side door burst open and fire and smoke flooded in. 3 men in heavy armor stormed inside, weapons blazing. Arkin was the first to charge, his plasma gun firing point-blank at the leader's head. Lyra clung tightly to her sled, aiming carefully at one who darted to the right. Her shot pierced his shoulder, making him howl and collapse. In the chaos, one last man lunged at Lyra. With the reflexes of a seasoned fighter, she aimed her gun and pulled the trigger. A dry click out of ammo. He dove for her, reaching to drag her off the sled. Arkin shouted, rushing in and slamming into the man from the side. Both of them tumbled across the cold floor. Lyra grabbed the small knife hidden beneath the sled and stabbed it into her attacker's leg. He screamed, letting go just long enough for Arkin to smash the butt of his gun into the man's neck, knocking him out. The bunker was wrecked, thick with smoke and the smell of gunpowder. Lyra gasped for breath, her hands covered in blood, her eyes fixed on Arkin. "You always risk your life for me. For what?" Arkin dropped to one knee beside her, gripping her shoulder, his weathered eyes shining with a feeling deeper than any battlefield promise. "Because I've left too many comrades behind. I've lost everything, family, friends, a cause. If I abandon someone again this time, I won't be able to go on living." A heavy silence spread between them. Lyra saw a tear slip down Arkin's hardened face. She couldn't help herself. Her cold hand gently touched his cheek. "You don't know how many of your people I've killed, how many cities I've burned, how I once stood atop the world thinking I was invincible. But in the end I was just someone thrown away by my own kind." Arkin took her hand, pressing it to his chest. "I don't care about your past. Here, right now, it's just you and me, two people who have lost everything but still have each other. If you want to live, then live with me. If you want to die, then I'll die by your side." That admission cut away the last defenses Lyra still held. She burst into tears, not from pain, but from finally having someone brave enough to stay, to accept her flaws and brokenness. After the battle, the two had to leave quickly before reinforcements arrived. Arkin carried Lyra through narrow, dark corridors, searching for a deeper hideout in the sewer system. On the way, Lyra told him about her daughter, the child who had been separated from her on the day the city fell, the last memory being a tiny hand pulled away, out of her reach. "She might still be alive somewhere," Arkin murmured, his voice full of both hope and sorrow. Lyra shook her head. "I don't dare to believe. I've lost everything too many times by believing. But when I'm with you, I want to believe again." Arkin stopped, turning to face Lyra fully. He cupped her face in both hands, pulled her close, his lips finding hers. Not a kiss of lust, but one of longing, trembling, burning with the pain of two souls who had been through hell. Lyra did not resist. She clung to his neck, almost melting into him in the freezing darkness, as if only here could she be herself, vulnerable, loved. "Maybe I'll never forgive my past," Lyra whispered against Arkin's skin, their breaths mingling. "But I want to live for this moment." Arkin helped her sit, both leaning against the wall, hand in hand. He told her about his first wife, killed in a Revalis raid, about the guilt that haunted him every night, about his fear of ever opening his heart again. But it was Lyra, with her wounds and her resilience, who had pulled him back from the abyss. They sat in silence for a long time. Then, without words, they found each other again, their bodies entwined amid the dripping water and distant echoes of metal. This time their touches were not rushed, not the frantic release of a night between life and death, but the hunger to keep living, to hold on to belonging with every breath. Arkin traced every scar on Lyra's body, every patch of numb skin, kissing them as if trying to ease every pain. Lyra responded with fierce honesty. She needed no pity, no empty promises. She only needed to know he was there, touching her as a real woman, not a soldier, not a ruin of war. Once again in the darkness they found hope. When the acid rain outside finally stopped, they still hadn't slept. Lyra rested her head on Arkin's shoulder, eyes distant. "If I'm not here tomorrow, will you regret saving me?" Arkin smiled, kissing her silver hair. "If I hadn't saved you, I'd have died inside long ago." That answer let Lyra, for the first time, close her eyes and trust in a tomorrow. Whatever that might bring, at least they would never be alone again. The breath of Veyra city remained cold, but now the air was thick with a new kind of danger. The acid rain had stopped, replaced by a wind so sharp it sliced across ruined walls like 1,000 blades. Arkin and Lyra had only just managed to rebuild a temporary shelter when the sensor monitor began blinking wildly. A strange coded signal appeared, Revalis frequency, something only former high-ranking officers could decode. Lyra stared at the string of numbers, her heart jolting with a strange pain. "That's my daughter's identification code," she whispered, her eyes flaring with a mix of hope and fear. One short message appeared in the darkness. "Mom, they're holding me at the North Collection Center. Please come." Arkin squeezed Lyra's shoulder tightly, his eyes blazing with a resolve both familiar and new, like in his days as a soldier. But this time, for the woman beside him and a child who had never been his. What if this is a trap? Lyra pressed her lips together, her voice trembling but fierce. "Even if it is, I have to go. If I don't, I'll never forgive myself. I'm not afraid to die. I'm only afraid of losing my last hope." Arkin nodded, all hesitation gone from his gaze. "I'm going with you. We end this there or we die together." They began to prepare. Arkin checked his weapons and distraction devices, while Lyra inspected her patched-up armor and reinserted the pair of survival sensors into her wrists, though her hands still trembled from sudden spasms of pain. Pin, the loyal robot, was assigned to protect the escape route, ready to be the last shield if everything spun out of control. Their journey led them through dark, reeking sewer tunnels, the air thick with mold and chemicals. Every step tested both their endurance and their will. Sometimes Lyra was nearly exhausted. Every movement sent pain searing through her back, cold sweat running down her face, even as she kept her lips pressed tight against any sound. Arkin had to carry her over steep slopes, feeling every hot, ragged breath against his neck, not out of desire, but out of a bond that defied explanation. "If you die, I have nothing left to lose." Lyra pressed her face into Arkin's back, for the first time allowing herself to completely let go, no defenses, not trying to be strong. Amid that choking, fearful darkness, all she had left was the instinct to love, to live for someone else. The North Collection Center emerged in a sea of cold lights, surrounded by armored vehicles and a cluster of moving figures. In a glass room on the upper floor sat a small girl, blue-gray skin like Lyra's, silver hair in wild disarray, eyes filled with terror, bound to a chair, flanked by two unfamiliar Revalis men with faces cold as ice. Lyra clenched her fists until they bled. Arkin surveyed the area, analyzing the entry points, guard positions, pinpointing the weaknesses in the security system. "Wait for me to create a diversion. Crawl to the east side door. When I give the signal, go straight in, find the girl and hold onto her. Leave the rest to me," he whispered. Lyra nodded, her gaze hardening from fear to ruthless determination. "I won't let you die alone." The attack was a whirlwind. Arkin hurled an EMP grenade at the checkpoint, disabling the security system for a precious 10 seconds. He charged, dropping 3 guards with plasma sniper fire, then rolled down the stairs, drawing the rest of the squad after him. Lyra gritted her teeth, crawling like a ghost to the side door, firing her sidearm as she moved. Bullets struck her leg and shoulder, but she never stopped, the pain only sharpening her will. Breaking into the glass room, Lyra lunged forward, wrapping her arms tightly around her daughter, tears streaming down onto the girl's hair. "Mom's here. I'll never leave you again." The child burst into sobs, tiny arms squeezing her mother's neck, feeling safe for the first time after years of separation. Outside, the clatter of gunfire, shouting, and pounding feet erupted. Arkin was surrounded by 7, 8 soldiers, blood dripping from a gash in his shoulder to the floor. He fought like a cornered animal. Every blow, every shot was life or death. But just as things reached their most desperate, Lyra appeared behind him, her gun dropping the squad leader and opening a gap for Arkin to slip through the ring. All three, Arkin, Lyra, and her daughter, rushed toward the back gate, where Pin was ready to clear the way with its last barrage of light grenades. They slipped into the darkness, gunfire and explosions thundering behind them. Only when they were finally safe in the hidden bunker did they dare to collapse, breathless, onto the cold floor. Arkin fell to his knees, blood trickling from his shoulder and arm. Lyra, clutching her daughter, rushed to his side, her eyes overflowing with both worry and boundless gratitude. "You're insane, Arkin. If you died in there, what would I have done with my life?" Arkin forced a smile, his trembling hand clutching Lyra's shoulder, pulling her close. "I won't die, not while you and your daughter are safe." She said nothing more, only held him tighter, her lips finding his, as if to erase all wounds with that raw desire to live. They made love again, fierce, burning like two people who had finally and forever become each other's, even in a sea of death. Lyra climbed onto Arkin, no longer shy, no longer embarrassed or self-conscious about her wounded body. She only knew he was the one who had let her feel alive again, a true woman, not a cripple or a fallen warrior. Arkin gave her everything he had left, breath, heart, strength, and a love he'd never dared imagine. Every touch, every embrace, every moan was a silent vow. From now on, nothing would stand between them, no more darkness, only the light they created together. In the night, as the noise outside faded, only their mingled breaths, the scent of skin, the tang of blood, and the salt of tears and sweat on their lips remained. Lyra whispered, "Stay with me, even if this world turns to ashes." Arkin nodded, his lips never leaving her neck. "I'm not going anywhere. We'll begin again together." When the first dawn rose over the dead city, Arkin, Lyra, and the little girl lay together in the dark but warm bunker, warmed by nothing but their breath and their belief in the future. They were no longer ghosts haunted by war. They were a small family, a new beginning. From that day, all three left the city together, heading for an unknown land, leaving behind the past, the wounds and all the pain. For the first time in years, Lyra leaned on Arkin's shoulder, looking forward with the eyes of someone who knew she'd never be alone again. On the first morning after their escape, the rare sunlight of Veyra slipped through a crack in the door, casting a thin golden line across the floor of the small room where Arkin, Lyra, and little Elva had just spent a windless night together. They had left behind the gunfire, the flames, the blood, and the faces of those who hunted them. There were only 3 people now, sitting together, their breaths mingling in a rare, fragile peace they had never believed could truly be theirs. Elva slept soundly in the corner, curled up like a small animal between 2 thick blankets. Now and then she stirred, her tiny hand still clutching the edge of her mother's shirt, not willing to let go even in her dreams. Lyra sat quietly by the window, silver-gray hair spilling down her shoulders, blue-gray skin speckled with old scars, her gaze suddenly distant and gentle in a way that felt new. She looked toward the rising sun, lips pressed together as if afraid this happiness might vanish at any moment. Arkin appeared beside her carrying 2 cups of warm water, silently placing one into Lyra's hand. He said nothing, just sat close, letting his shoulder brush gently against hers, warmth passing into her cold skin and sending a subtle, delicious shiver through her. Lyra didn't look at him, but her free hand slid naturally over his, their fingers weaving together tightly. A long silence passed, filled only with breathing and the glow of sunlight flooding the room. "Did you not sleep?" Lyra asked softly, her voice a whisper between dreams. Arkin shook his head. "I'm afraid I'll wake up and all of this will be a dream." Lyra smiled, turning to him, golden eyes deep enough to swallow the world. "If this is a dream, I never want to wake up." There was nothing more to say. The quiet between them was no longer awkward or distant, but the peace of belonging, a cool spring running into the cracks of souls once shattered. Arkin ran his hand gently through Lyra's hair, his fingers trailing down her neck, feeling the weak pulse of the woman who had once been a cold warrior, now gentle as a late-season rain. Lyra tilted her head, her lips finding his in the first kiss of a new day, as soft as silk yet as intense as a slow-burning fire banked for years. Her tongue brushed his, teasing his patience, at once inviting, gentle, and mischievous. Arkin squeezed Lyra's shoulder, pulling her onto his lap, his breath suddenly quickening. His hands began to wander down her back, each vertebra, each scar, every patch of skin that had once been numb, now awakened beneath his slow, tender touch. Lyra let out a tiny moan when his fingers slid under her thin shirt, tracing fiery circles around her waist. Then, in one motion, pulled her shirt over her head. Lyra's skin gleamed in the sunlight, rough with old wounds but silky smooth where war had not touched her. Arkin looked at her, his eyes overflowing with hunger and deep emotion. He pressed his lips to every scar, every bruise on Lyra's body, not with pity, but as if healing her, claiming every pain as his own, declaring it all worthy of love. Lyra wrapped her arms around Arkin's neck, pulling him closer, her breath hot and urgent, her heart pounding wildly with every move of the man she now loved more than any fear. Their bodies crashed together, no boundaries of species, no shame or fear of the past. Lyra herself undid Arkin's belt, her hands bold but trembling with a longing too long denied. "I want to feel you, every bit, not in a rush," Lyra whispered, her breath hot against Arkin's neck. He answered by lifting her up, turning her gently so that she lay beneath him, his body enveloping hers, at once protecting and demanding. From her neck to her shoulders, her chest, her stomach, Arkin's mouth traveled slowly, leaving wet kisses as soft as a breeze, as burning as the sun in summer. Lyra arched, her legs wrapping around Arkin's waist, still tingling but no longer lifeless. She trembled, overwhelmed with emotion, and with joy at feeling her body come alive again in his arms. Arkin moved inside her slowly, every thrust, every wave building, all the senses buried for years exploding like a volcano. They melted together, not just flesh but spirit. Every thrust, every moan from Lyra's lips was a thank you, a desperate longing to live, to belong, no more loneliness, no pain that couldn't be overcome. Arkin held her tightly, his hand tangled in her hair, his mouth on her ear whispering words of love he'd never spoken before, each movement deeper, slower, stretching time until nothing remained but their breathing, the sound of skin meeting skin, their urgent cries blending with the golden sunlight outside. Lyra met every surge of passion with the strength of a warrior, yet let herself go completely, like a girl in the arms of the first man she ever trusted, ever truly loved. She wept as they reached their climax together, not from pain, but knowing her life was forever changed. She would never be alone again. When it was over, they lay together for a long time. Arkin gently stroked Lyra's hair, whispering, "No matter what happens, I'll never leave you again." Lyra smiled through her tears, her hand touching his cheek, pulling him close for a kiss full of love and gratitude. In the corner, Elva still slept soundly, peaceful as a little angel. Arkin and Lyra leaned their heads together, holding each other tight, letting the last three souls of a broken age dream together of a future without gunfire. In the days that followed, Arkin built a small house with his own hands from the ruins of abandoned homes. Lyra recovered slowly, aided by medical devices and Arkin's meticulous care. Little Elva grew happier by the day, soon running and playing around the small yard, her laughter warming the cold air of Veyra. Their first meal as a family was simple: some hard bread, wild fruit, and a pot of warm water. But to them, it was a feast. Lyra sat between Arkin and Elva, beaming as she listened to her daughter tell old fairy tales from her home planet. Arkin watched the two quietly, his eyes, after so many years, sparkling with hope, not just for himself, but for a new future finally being born. At night, when Elva slept, Lyra and Arkin sat together under the porch, their hands entwined, leaning into each other, silent, listening to the wind in the fresh grass. No longer hunted, no longer haunted by war, they were two souls who had survived everything, learning to live again, with all the love, desire, and gratitude they possessed. Lyra looked up at the sky, whispering, "If there's another life, I'd still want to be human, just to love you once more." Arkin squeezed her hand, kissed her forehead, whispering back, "You don't need another life. Right now, we already belong to each other." Beneath the dim moon, amid gentle breathing, they came together again, not as a release from pain, but as a promise. After everything, they were born to save and to live for one another. Weeks passed since the day they left the dead city behind. On a windswept plateau, at the edge of a forest untouched by either humans or Revalis, Arkin had built a sturdy hut, crafted from scavenged wood, panels from an old ship, and bits of salvaged aid machinery with Pin loyally by his side. The nighttime cold now was only a vague memory. Mornings were awash in golden sunlight, and all three, Arkin, Lyra, Elva, felt as if they'd been reborn into a world that had never known war. Lyra's recovery was slow but steady. Thanks to Arkin's care and the last vials of precious biotech serum, sensation gradually returned to her legs. At first, it was only a slight twitch at her knee. Then came hesitant steps, shuffling around the yard with Arkin's strong arm to steady her. The day Lyra stood on her own, no longer needing help, Arkin wept like a child, tears of joy, of hope finally taking root. Elva, once silent in fear, now played everywhere, bringing home wildflowers and glittering stones from the brook. Her laughter rang out every morning, reminding Lyra that there truly was no wound that could not heal, so long as someone stayed beside you to the end. In the evenings, the family gathered around a small fire, eating simple meals but full of laughter, telling old stories, tales from the battlefield, stories of the stars, or the fairy tales Elva made up on the spot. Sometimes Lyra would gaze at Arkin in the firelight and see that he was still the strongest, most steadfast man she'd ever known, but also the gentlest, willing to give the rest of his life to protect a family imperfect and small in a world where no one else remained. After supper, once Elva was sound asleep in the tiny loft, Lyra and Arkin belonged to each other again. No gunfire, no worry, only breath, hands, and a desire that never cooled. Each night was a new beginning, a journey of rediscovery of old scars, new skin awakening, soft moans and tearful glances, love murmured against neck, chest, and hands held tight. Some nights, Lyra would surprise Arkin, pulling him close on the soft mattress, no longer self-conscious about her injuries, no longer afraid to let him see her bare under the moonlight. "Do you know," she whispered, her lips meeting his, "I never thought I'd feel this again, to be alive, to be loved, to truly be a woman." Arkin stroked her fingers, tousled her hair, murmured in return, "You saved me from death long ago, Lyra. Not on the battlefield, but inside, where I was nothing but ashes." They melted into each other, no distance left. No one hurried, no one needed to prove anything, just long, rolling waves, sometimes strong, sometimes gentle, a soft laugh breaking a hurried kiss, or a tight embrace that seemed it would never end. In that place, every time they made love was a new birth, no fear of abandonment, no shame of brokenness, no old wounds of war. There were only two souls seeing each other in the dark, clinging to one another as if holding onto the last breath of life in a ruined world. Peaceful days stretched on, Elva growing up wild in nature, with no more nightmares to haunt her sleep. Lyra became a tender mother, a passionate wife, and a companion Arkin could not live without. He was their anchor, protector, patient listener to hours of stories from mother and daughter, a man bold enough to love fully even after surviving utter loss. One afternoon, Lyra and Arkin sat together on the hillside, wind whipping through their blue and silver hair. Lyra leaned her head on his shoulder, eyes set on a blazing sunset, her voice low but full of happiness. "Do you think we'll always keep this happiness?" Arkin squeezed her shoulder and smiled. "No one knows what tomorrow brings, but today we are truly alive. And for me, that's enough." Lyra turned and kissed Arkin deeply, not a kiss of pain or regret, but one of pure gratitude and passion. Beneath the setting sun, they made love again, as quietly and fiercely as the universe forging new planets, silent, intense, immortal in that moment. When night fell, Arkin stood at the door, gazing at the star-filled sky. A warm hand settled on his back. Lyra, wrapped in a long white dress, eyes shining with a confidence he'd never seen in her before. "Do you want to dance?" Arkin teased, his voice playful. Lyra laughed, nestling into his chest, whispering, "I want to do everything as long as it's with you." Beneath that sky, they danced, made love, and laughed like there would never be another tomorrow. Elva peered down from the loft, her eyes shining like the stars, whispering softly, "This is my family, and I'll never be alone again." The next morning, on a sunlit hillside, the three of them stood together, the little house at their backs, an entire world waiting before them. Lyra was nearly fully recovered, Elva growing strong and fast, and Arkin, though his hair had silvered, still burned with the fierce light of a man who had dared to fight for love to the end. They were no longer survivors, no longer victims of war. They had truly become people who lived, with each other, for each other, because of each other. Every new day was a chance to begin again, a new chapter for a story once written in blood and tears, now bathed in laughter and light. If there was another life, they would still find each other among the millions, because souls that once saved each other can never truly be parted.